Hello again, wrestling fans, and welcome to another edition of the Good Friends, Better Enemies podcast. My name's Jay, and as always, I'm joined by my tag team partner, good old-fashioned Tyrone. Ty, how you doing, buddy?
I'm fucking fired up today, Jay. We got a good topic to talk about. I'm ready. I'm amped. Let's get into this. Let's just get into this. We have some things to talk about. We're going to talk a little current product, which we normally don't do, but something happened. And then I know we got some detailed notes about this episode, don't we?
We have some very, very detailed notes. And, you know, it's funny, when we announced this last week, and I knew it was coming up on the schedule, the final Nitro, WCW's final shot in the now very much past rearview mirror look at the Monday Night Wars. We know that the war was far, far behind us at this point in 2001. The WWF had been very much in the driver's seat for a long period of time. But the closer we got to this episode, and when I really started looking at it more in depth, the more I realized that I think this might to date be the most important episode we've done. I think that we really need to provide some context to WCW. And I think being the 20-year anniversary this month, actually on March 26th, I felt like we really owed it to ourselves and to our audience to really give it a really, really good go this week. So what do you think about that?
Oh, as I said before, I am ready. I think WCW died a horrible, horrible death, but to no fault of their own, really. Or I shouldn't say of their own, to no fault of a lot of people. It was mainly 1, 2, 3 guys who completely ruined it. We'll get into that later, but yeah, I am stoked to talk about this one.
As am I. I can't wait to get into the weeds on it, to coin a phrase. But before we do, I believe that you wanted to talk about something that happened actually last night on Monday Night Raw. Spoiler alert, excuse me. We have decided to record this on Tuesday this week. So we both got a chance to watch Monday Night Raw last night, and something quite eventful took place. You want to take us through it?
Yeah, we have a new WWE champion with Bobby Lashley. The era has begun. I don't know how I feel about it, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that it was handled poorly to a degree. I really hated the match is going to start at 9, and then something happened, and the match is going to start at 10, and then something happened. Like, are your ratings that fucking low that you're just going to keep us all on the hook for a little while? Now, does Bobby Lashley deserve it? Yeah, there's no arguing. The man's put in his time. He's been doing this for 17 to 20 years or something like that. He's killing it. The Hurt Business is probably one of the best things going right now. I hate the fact that The Miz is legitimately the definition of a transitional champion right now. And now I'm curious as to what we see for Mania. Do we get Drew and Bobby? Do we get Drew and Sheamus in a non-title match? Do we get Miz and Bobby Lashley? Do we get something completely different? What do you think about this, Jay? Also, one thing I wanted to throw in, the Lumberjacks. Was I the only one that thought it was weird that Retribution was out there as a lumberjack, considering they're supposed to be this whole anti-company, we do whatever the hell we want thing?
Yeah, definitely wasn't lost on me either. I will say that when I was watching it last night, it reminded me very much of an old episode of Raw. It was actually the night after the In Your House Final Four from 1997, and that was the night where Bret Hart had won the championship. And the following night on Raw, Sid was going to get the winner. And we had so the main event it was actually in Nashville, Tennessee, for a live Monday Night Raw. We were going to get Sid versus Bret, and it was going to be at the top of the 9 o'clock or top of the hour at 8:57. And they did the exact same thing. They teased it, and then Steve Austin came out and interfered, and then they were going to do it the next hour at 10 o'clock, and it ended up being that Steve Austin attacked Bret from behind in the back when he was on his way to the ring, and then they ended up finally doing the main event right in the closing segment of the show. So I do remember them doing something similar to this before. But yeah, to your point, I think that the win was very anticlimactic. I'm very glad that Lashley won the title. I hope now that it's not going to be another hot potato thing, and that's going to be hot shotted again at Mania. I would like to see whomever the champion is hold on to it for a while. I had a feeling that Miz wouldn't hold on to it for too long, but I did think that had he been booked correctly, we could have seen a longer title run with him. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So now going into Mania, I really don't know what we're going to get. I got to be honest, Drew versus Lashley doesn't do a whole lot for me. I know this is probably not going to be the most popular opinion, but I would personally love to see Lesnar and Lashley. I know a lot of people don't want to see that. I think it would be a car crash of a match, a lot of fun, or maybe that needs to be at SummerSlam, or maybe we'll never get it. I don't know. But as of right now, I will say I am intrigued to see where they go with it and who gets the shot. It's too hard to call right now, I think.
I think you've been listening to me too much, because I don't think that there's a lot of people who don't want to see that match. I think I don't, and I could be the lot of people you're listening to, but I think there are a fair amount of people that want to see Bobby Lashley and Brock Lesnar. I don't at all. But again, like you said, I don't really want to see Drew McIntyre and Bobby Lashley either, which is the route I think we're getting so that they can give Drew his title win in front of a crowd, since last year was nobody. This year will at least be, by the sounds of it, probably about 30,000 people. But that's the only reason I see this happening. And then again, Bobby Lashley is a transitional champion. Does he just fall right back down the card, a la Kofi Kingston and King Kong Bundy main eventing WrestleMania, all those great stars that have done huge, huge things, either main eventing or been champions, and then it's forgotten the next week? Like, do many people remember that Dolph Ziggler is a former 2-time world champion? Because I don't think they do. And I don't want to see that happen with Bobby Lashley. I think he deserves a good title run. I think he deserves to just completely plow through everybody the way he did The Miz. Like, he dominated that match. The Miz did not get a single offensive move in. It was complete and utter car crash, beat the living hell out of him, which I get considering how pissed off he was with the 9 o'clock, then 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. It's kind of how it should have been. But it needs to be Bobby Lashley staying strong, running through everybody. I'm okay with whoever he faces at Mania if it's a 30-second match and he squashes them. I don't see an issue with that whatsoever.
Well, the only way I'd really have an issue with it is if you use somebody like Drew McIntyre, who has been the face of the COVID era, for the lack of a better term, for the last year or so. I don't want to see him get run through in 30 seconds. And again, I don't really find that match overly intriguing. I mean, they could do something that'll pique my interest, but for right now, I mean, we have to remember as well, we still have Fastlane coming up as well in, I think, 2 weeks. So we'll see what happens with that. Maybe we'll have a number one contenders match, or I don't really know where they're going with it. But I'm with you. I don't want to see now Lashley then either drop the title at Fastlane or Mania, whichever one it is. I think that you need to keep the title on him for a bit. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I know that there's a lot of people online, when I read last night on Twitter and on our social media feeds, that were very excited about him being the champion. And so I think that if there's a groundswell right now and people are excited about it, then run with it. But as I said, I mean, I was intrigued to see where they go with it. And I think last night's Raw was the first time I've been kind of interested to see where they go after Raw for the first time in quite a while. In fact, I told our counterpart over at the Counted Out 7 podcast, Tyler, I texted him and said that this is the first time I've watched a Raw in about a year that I felt like, okay, where are they going with this? As opposed to being like, okay, I've tuned in and now I don't have to watch for, a couple of months because I don't care. So we'll see what happens. It's interesting.
Yeah, it was definitely the best thing they did on Raw, considering the only other match that they kind of are building up for Mania on the Raw brand is Braun Strowman versus Shane McMahon. And I truly do not give two shits about that. I don't get why Shane's all of a sudden back and in charge. I guess Adam Pearce wasn't doing good enough, so they had to call in Shane O'Mac. I don't ever need to see Shane versus Braun. It's not going to be good. It's going to be a spot match with Braun doing the power work and Shane jumping off of something tall. I don't care about it.
Yeah, well, that seems to be the MO every year, though. We seem to get a Shane match, and I don't think I hate it as much as you do. I mean, I think that there are more interesting ways to bring Shane in. I've always thought that a really, really interesting feud would be like Shane versus Triple H, and I know probably you're not going to be too jazzed about that either, but I think that, telling that story correctly about the fact that Shane left, and then you have Triple H who kind of assumed power while he was gone, and he's married to his sister, and there's a lot of contention there because of that. I think that story could be really, really interesting if told properly. I don't know how great the match would be. I think it'd be a fun match. But I think that something like that, for me personally, would be a lot more interesting from a storyline perspective than, say, this Braun and Shane McMahon thing. It just seems to be kind of coming out of nowhere, and they're building towards it, and they still have 6 weeks, so we'll see where they get. But as of right now, it's nothing that's piquing my interest.
Yeah, but that's also because you're the definition of a full-time wrestling fan who prefers part-time wrestlers. You love the nostalgic acts that WrestleMania brings out, whereas I hate it. I don't need to see Triple H come out for one match a year. Don't need to see Shane McMahon, Goldberg, anybody else they want to dig up from the fucking dead ways of 90s wrestling. I don't need to see it. I don't ever want to see Stone Cold wrestle again. I don't want to see The Rock. I'm done with Kurt Angle. Give me all the young talent that is hungry for it, and stop bringing in these old guys who, yes, they paved the way. They did a great job of doing it, but it's 2021. I don't need to see Triple H spit any more water and give the entire crowd COVID.
Oh, I didn't see that coming. No, listen. You're absolutely right. Do I enjoy the nostalgic acts? For sure. But I will be the first one to admit, and I've in fact told you off air and maybe even on air, I don't recall, but I am kind of over these Legends nights. I think they're fun if done sparingly. I feel like we get the same legends every time they do it, which is fine, but then do it once every 2 years, or do it once every 3 years even. Or change up the legends that you bring back. But I don't need to see, like Ric Flair, we've talked about before on this podcast. I love Ric Flair. I think he's great. I've never been his biggest fan, but I have a lot of respect for his contributions, and he's fun to see on your TV. But as a weekly character at 72, 73 years old, I don't need to see it. It's great to see him come back with the legends like Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels, and Hulk Hogan sometimes comes back. I mean, I'm fine with seeing these guys come back in the correct environment. As far as active in-ring legends, yeah, I think it adds to the presentation, and I definitely think it enhances, for me as a viewer, WrestleMania and some of these tentpole events. I definitely enjoy watching them come back. I wouldn't want to see them every week on television, and I love the current product in terms of the young talent that's in the ring. It's just, unfortunately for me, so much of the young talent that's on the screen that I personally enjoy watching are kind of marginalized right now, and they're pushing people in the company that I'm not particularly excited about. I would love to see Kevin Owens in a big time spot. I still believe that Kevin Owens, pushed correctly, could be the face of the company, but he's not going to get that opportunity, unfortunately. So whereas I see your point with the legends and bringing them back, I definitely think, for me as a viewer, it enhances my enjoyment of the product.
Yeah, it really sucks the fact, though, that just because he's a chubby French Canadian, Vince doesn't get behind him, which Ring of Honor has proven twice that chubby French Canadian dudes can lead the company, like Kevin Steen, like PCO. I don't get why Kevin Steen, aka Kevin Owens, isn't doing it now. He should be moving the dial. I would love, if we're talking about part-timers who are going to come back, give me a Samoa Joe. He doesn't wrestle really anymore. I'd gladly take Samoa Joe coming out of commentary and wrestling one more time than seeing Triple H come back, then seeing Shane McMahon, then seeing The Undertaker, Kane, any of those guys. I don't need to see them ever again unless it's a quick 2-minute Royal Rumble spot.
No, I agree with that 100%. There's certain guys that I don't really want to see wrestle in a match anymore. Even I've professed this many times. The Undertaker's my favorite wrestling character of all time. Do I want to see him do another match? Not really. I mean, if I got to see him come out and do a spot with a choke slam and a tombstone at WrestleMania, then I'm fine with that. I think it'd be a lot of fun. But for him to have a match, I don't see it. Triple H, I think, still has a couple in him. Maybe you don't think or see it that way. I think he's definitely going to have at least one more match. He's not going to just go out based on that Batista match that he had. Or rather, I think the last match he had was against Randy Orton at the Super Showdown in Saudi Arabia. So I do see him having another final match. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't see it this year. Maybe it will be. I don't know. But as far as other part-timers, yeah, Samoa Joe would be great. I think it's going to happen too. I think eventually you're going to have one of those situations where somebody just rubs him the wrong way and he just throws down the headset and throws on his submission hold there, the clutch, and he's just going to decimate someone. I can totally see that happening. But as far as in-ring guys that can still go that are legends, there's not that many left. And I think we've segued now to the point where maybe 5 or 6 years ago it was Attitude Era stars that were still coming out and doing that kind of thing, and now we've sort of transitioned into Ruthless Aggression stars like John Cena. I think still has a couple of matches left in him. So I don't know who do you book with who, and who's your final Cena match with, who's your final Triple H match with. I don't know. I would suspect it's going to be against a younger talent to try to elevate them, but then again, maybe you go back to an old feud like, Orton and Cena for their final match. I don't know how it's going to go, but
it's going to 100%. The final match will be Triple H versus John Cena, and it'll main event, and it'll stink the joint out.
I don't think that would main event. I don't think that would main event WrestleMania at this point. I think it'd be a main event, maybe third from the top, but I don't see it being the go home match of the show.
Yeah, you could be right. I mean, we can keep talking about this if you want. I can keep getting fired up, or we can move on to the topic of today's show. It's completely up to you.
Yeah, no, I think that we've pretty much covered our bases. I think we both see legends differently. I see it a little bit more like you do than you think I do. I do see your points 100%. But at the same token, I do think that there's a place on the card for them. I mean, and if done correctly. And so we'll see what happens and where it goes. But we're getting to a point as well where, there's not that many established, really over legends left. So eventually they're not going to be able to pull that card anymore. So we'll see what happens.
Well, hopefully the next one that returns is just Bad News Barrett coming off the commentary table in NXT and delivering some bad news for everybody.
Yeah, or a WWE legend, Alicia Fox.
I was actually going to bring her up earlier, but I didn't want to fire you up as fired up as I am, so I thought I'd save that for later.
No, it wouldn't fire me up. I just think it's ridiculous that she's a WWE legend suddenly, but I guess she's been with the company like 15 years, so if that's what constitutes you being a legend, then she's a legend. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get into the final Monday Nitro, which took place on March 26, 2001. It took place at Panama City Beach, Florida, and it was a pretty anticlimactic show from the start. Really, if you go back and watch the show on the WWE Network or wherever you consume your wrestling programming from the past, it was more of a vehicle to sell WrestleMania. In fact, the whole broadcast was basically a WrestleMania 17 commercial, with the final angle on the show being between Vince and Shane McMahon. So I think that you and I both agree that they could have done a much better job sending off WCW. I mean, we knew that they were going to go out with a whimper and not a bang, but at the same time, they definitely deserved a lot better than what they got based on their history, their legacy, their lineage, and, the fact that they had been riding high in the 1990s, beating Vince McMahon for a couple of years there.
Yeah, it was a weird episode. Like, as you said, it was essentially a commercial for WrestleMania 17, and then you fast forward 6 days later to WrestleMania, and a good chunk of their talent is in a skybox just watching. Like, they went from being fearful about their jobs, not knowing who has a job, to all of a sudden they're the VIP guests, which made no sense to me whatsoever. I thought the handling of this episode was piss poor, and it was clearly overly produced by the WWE agents and staff. They had, WCW had no input in it whatsoever. One thing I'll touch on quickly before we get to the episode is you could tell with the commentary team. Like, you could tell Tony Schiavone knew he probably wasn't getting a job, so he really didn't give two shits about the episode. Whereas Scott Hudson was hopeful to get a job, and he really gave it his all. And I thought Scott Hudson was fantastic throughout this episode.
Yeah, throughout the course of the commentary, definitely. I mean, I don't think that Tony really phoned it in, but I think that definitely you could tell that Scott Hudson was angling to try and push the WrestleMania angle and trying to really push the idea of what's Vince McMahon going to say, well, how is he going to address the troops kind of thing. So he was definitely trying really hard to elevate what was going on, whereas I think Tony was just kind of calling the action and a little bit sort of waxing nostalgic about WCW more so than trying to enhance what the direction of the show was. To your point, I do agree with you, but I think that Tony still did a pretty good job.
Yeah, but we talked about this off air a couple of days ago, and I think the agreement is that for the most part, Tony Schiavone started to check out in '99 when everything started to get really weird and really crazy in the company, and it just really made no sense at all. He was just like, well, folks, we're here. This is what we're doing. I guess I'm going to try and call the action, but I don't even know what's coming up next because they keep changing my run sheet.
Yeah, and that was something that was inherently going on, I think, towards the latter part of '99. That's when the wheels started falling off. You would see, from a production standpoint, I mean, is that you would see like these weird shots where you would see people that were supposed to like barge into a room. You'd see a shot of them assembling, like they were supposed to be off camera and they were assembling to like do this run in. And then they would be sort of on camera and then suddenly they would be cut. And then 30 seconds later, they'd cut back and they'd barge through this door. So you would see stuff like that, these gaffes and snafus that were just, for a company and a product that was so tightly coordinated and so well produced a couple of years earlier, to see those kinds of like obvious slips was a little unfortunate. I spent the better part of the weekend actually watching some old WCW, a couple of the Super Brawls, and then also, of course, going into I think I watched Greed as well. So I watched the final pay-per-view, and there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to see, so I get the tone and tenor of what was going on the weeks and months leading up to WCW's ultimate demise. And you could see these kinds of gaffes and obvious production snafus. And it was unfortunate to see. It kind of made me sad.
Yeah, I vividly remember one in particular, and I swear I did not just recently watch this. It's just been in my head forever. I think it was Norman Smiley and Brian Knobbs in a hardcore match, and they were like in the middle of, it looked like a ghost town or a rodeo or something like that. And Tony Schiavone just basically, there was a table set up and he went, well, why wouldn't there be a WCW table there? Obviously, they're ready at all times for anything that could happen with the hardcore title. And at that point, I just went, really? You need to just stop doing your job because you're not making it believable at all. Let Mike Tenay talk and you stop talking.
Yeah, I think that from a perspective of Tony's as well, I mean, you have to remember he was a producer as well. So he was probably super frustrated, being behind the commentary table and having gone through all these production aspects earlier in the day to see these things obviously change and then have, as you alluded to, a run sheet that he was following, and then it would just suddenly change out of nowhere. That must have been super frustrating for him. And I'm sure at certain points he just wanted to check out. He was just like, I'm done with this. I don't want to listen to these production people talking into my ear right now because, I have a run sheet to follow, but if I go by what I have, I'm obviously going to be way off base. So it must be super frustrating from that aspect as well.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And I'm not trying to say that Schiavone's a bad commentator by any means. Like, you give me Schiavone from the late 80s up until the later 90s, he was fantastic. And even now in AEW, he's great. But that time frame of the last couple of years, he was just so checked out, collecting his cup of coffee or collecting his paycheck while having a cup of coffee. Like, he probably thought he could say almost anything and no one would even pick up on if he said something wrong. And he was probably right. Like, I will honestly say that Tony Schiavone is my second favorite WCW commentator of all time. And I'm only putting him behind Mike Tenay because I thought Mike Tenay was fantastic.
They had some really solid commentators, even in the early 2000s for WCW. They had some really solid commentators. I didn't dislike Mark Madden. I thought Mark Madden was kind of a fun commentator. I mean, he said some pretty offside things from time to time. I think maybe he was WCW's answer to like a Paul Heyman or maybe like a shock jock type thing, like a Howard Stern. He would say some pretty controversial things, and then he would rip on people for a shoot, like Hogan and people like that he didn't have a lot of respect for backstage. He would just shoot on them on commentary. So I don't know. They had some really good commentators. I think Mike Tenay is extremely underrated in his contributions. But as far as Tony Schiavone goes, yeah, you're probably right. Probably by this time he was probably completely checked out. I wouldn't be surprised.
Mark Madden is the experiment that went right that Vince McMahon wanted with Rob Bartlett back in '93.
I'll take that. Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that a lot. I think that you're right. I think that the big difference is that Mark Madden came from, wrestling journalism. He came from the websites, and he was covering wrestling for a long time. So he had the product knowledge to back his opinions, whereas Rob Bartlett was just kind of saying things off the top of his head that he thought were funny, and sometimes would be in the context of the show, they wouldn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if you ask me, they should have probably had Art Donovan guest host Raw in the beginning, but that obviously.
I was just gonna say at least he wasn't Art Donovan.
How big's this arena, Gorilla? So yeah, I just wanted to quickly go through a couple of moments here in tentpole events and discuss a few things that are going in and leading into the closure of WCW. But we're going to start from the beginning. I think a lot of people are aware that WCW, or rather Crockett Promotions, JCP, they weren't doing very well in the late 80s. A lot of people believe that this was because they overextended themselves financially by trying to enter a more nationalized market, as opposed to sticking to their kind of home base of certain smaller markets that really were proven draws for them. They were trying to compete with the WWF, who at the time in the mid to late 80s was just on fire. And at this point already, I think they were kind of untouchable in terms of their scope and scale. So when you have Jim Crockett trying to compete in markets that he had never really run, or that he had weak television, it became an issue, and they overextended themselves to the point where they were financially insolvent. So from there, you have Ted Turner, who comes in and he purchases Jim Crockett Promotions in November of 1988. November 2nd, actually, the deal was finalized. And then from there, you had this sort of myriad of different bookers come in from different walks of life. You had Jim Hurd, who was a corporate manager or regional manager of Pizza Hut. And then you had Ole Anderson, and you had Bill Watts, and we all have heard the story about Bill Watts and his racist diatribe that was said to a wrestling dirt sheet, for the lack of a better term, that got him fired. Somebody had forwarded that diatribe to Hank Aaron, who was involved with WCW, or sorry, not WCW, who was involved with Turner, the company Time Warner. So that bug got placed in his ear, and Bill Watts was gone very, very shortly after that. So fast forward to 1993, the early part of 1993, we have Eric Bischoff, who is now been made the executive producer. Now, an executive producer is responsible for the production aspects of the show. He wasn't booking, he wasn't part of creative, but he was the guy who was sort of molding and shaping the feel of the show from a technical perspective, camera shots, entranceways, pyro, the way the show was formatted in terms of the run of the show, things of that nature. And he did a pretty good job with that. So then fast forward into early 1994, we have him become the vice president of WCW, which basically means at that point he was given the reins to be in charge of the day-to-day operations, all of it, all in. It was all on his shoulders at that point. And then, of course, not too long after that, Hulk Hogan came in, and the fortune slowly started to change. A lot of people seem to think that when Hogan came in, that it was this huge immediate turnaround. And in fact, while it was a big boon to the company in 1994, and we got to see our first pay-per-view meeting between Hogan and Flair at Bash of the Beach in 1994, by 1996, before the NWO came in and became a prominent force and maybe the most important aspect of WCW, Hogan really wasn't drawing all that well. His gimmick was kind of tired at this point, and especially I think because the red and yellow that had been so prominent in the 80s, a lot of people sort of looked at it as like sort of a nostalgia act, jerking the curtain kind of thing. So that's where we land in 1996. And do you have any thoughts about any of this content so far, my friend?
I mean, you're kind of nailing it all on the head. I the only thing I will touch on is it's really unfortunate to hear all the racist shit about Bill Watts, considering I don't get how you can be somebody who puts a black man like the Junkyard Dog at the top of your territory, but then behind closed doors just say all the horrible, horrible things that he said. Like, he was clearly just trying to make money off of the dog, which is terrible. Absolutely terrible. And then he would go on to do what he did, which was unforgivable. They did the right thing by getting rid of him. God bless the fact that it was a giant corporation with Turner Broadcasting, the Atlanta Braves, everything like that got involved. I hate hearing anything about racism or any kind of ism, really, sexism, ageism, anything like that. I'm not all about. So it's a good thing that he was removed when he was.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It was a really unfortunate thing, but I think that he had such a derisive way of handling talent that at that time it made a lot of sense for him to go anyways. I mean, had that particular diatribe not happened, I think it was just a matter of time. The writing was on the wall that he was probably going to be out the door at that time anyhow. So I think
it's
ultimately,
just I guess the only positive thing about him being with the company is that Turner kind of learned from Jim Herd that you can't just throw a guy who was the freaking regional manager of Pizza Hut and put them in charge of a wrestling company. You need somebody with a wrestling background to be in charge of a company like that.
I agree to somewhat of a degree, but the difference for me is that that's a fair comment to make on its face. But then when you look fast forward to who they picked next, they picked Ole Anderson, they picked Bill Watts, both of whom were, ingrained in the wrestling business. It wasn't any better, and in fact, in some ways, it was worse.
Okay, well, maybe I should have spoken differently. They needed a younger person that was in tune with the current product and what fans wanted, and not somebody who thought that throwing somebody over the top rope and jumping off the top rope was still a disqualification in the mid-90s.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I completely agree with that. I think that especially in Bill Watts' case, I think he was trying to hold on to a bygone era in the industry. And I've heard him explain it himself that he didn't want to have these rules come into effect with the top ropes and the over-the-top rope stipulations because he was trying to slow down the product. He was just trying to make it that there'd be more stakes involved in trying to figure out creative ways to do these moves without being caught by the referee. And I understand that logic to an extent, but it was very antiquated and the business was moving at a rapid pace in another direction. I mean, if you look at the growth from, like, say, 1985 to the year 2000, I mean, the business is basically unrecognizable from where it started. So I think that he needed to get on that train. And if he wasn't going to be forward thinking in terms of trying to innovate and create to change the business, I just don't think he was going to get left in the dust. And that's ultimately what happened to him. So I think that you and I can both agree. I don't want to speak for you. And I got to tell you, I'm just having so much fun talking about this right now. I love getting into the deep, dark weeds, talking about this granular business stuff. I just love it. I think we can both agree that Bischoff ultimately, certainly in the beginning, was exactly what WCW needed to get to a more modern, contemporary look and feel. Would you agree with that?
Why? Because he looked contemporary? Because he was kind of a walking Ken doll?
No, I just mean that I think that his vision for where he brought WCW to from say 93, we just covered Super Brawl 93 last week, and now we're looking through into like 94, 95, 96. You can see that the tone and tenor of WCW changed quite a bit. It became more modernized. It looked much more of its time as opposed to hanging on to a bygone era.
Oh, yeah, and Bischoff will tell you himself, if you let him, that he's the reason that they went from the dark, unlit, smoke-filled buildings to Disney MGM Studios. He thought that was great. I think Bischoff made some great decisions. I don't think he was the savior of WCW like a lot of people make him out to be.
And that's fair. We're going to continue on our journey here, and I understand that. There's a lot of people that have a lot of varying opinions about Eric Bischoff, and rightfully so. So before I go any further, I just want to make it clear that I don't want to go through the granular minutia of the Monday Night Wars. It's been covered to death. Everybody that's listening to this podcast is, I'm fairly certain, well educated about wrestling and about the product and about its history. And probably a lot of people, if you're listening to this podcast based on it being retro booking of events, you probably have a pretty good finger on the pulse of what happened back in the late 90s. So I don't really want to run through the history of what happened in WCW and, them going 83 weeks and the neck and neck competition. I want to actually fast forward to the year 2000. And at that time, AOL Time Warner was merging. Actually, AOL and Time Warner were merging. And the deal was announced on January 10th, 2000. AOL was buying Time Warner for $182 billion in stock and debt. It was actually the biggest merger in U.S. history at the time. Now, this was at the height of the .com movement and the bubble, and its valuation, or rather AOL's valuation of its stock and its value was so high, it was what allowed them to actually purchase Time Warner in the first place. Now, the purchase wouldn't be completed until January of 2001. So they had a year of due diligence to go through the books and comb through everything to make sure that we were all on the same page and everything was on the up and up. And at that time, it was sort of, the writing was on the wall that WCW was going to be no more. So at this time, Eric Bischoff actually, who had been relieved of his duties back in September 10th of 1999, had come back in the beginning of 2000 to help clean up Vince Russo's mess. We'll get into that in a minute. But he had actually approached somebody named Brian Bedall. Now, Brian Bedall was the creator and curator of a company that was actually buying classic content from different sources, like the Classic Sports Channel and the College Sports Channel. He actually would go to different universities and colleges, and he would buy this old footage that nobody had any idea what to do with. It was just sitting in a vault. And he created these two channels, which ultimately became ESPN Classics and CBS Sports Network. Now, those were bought by ESPN and CBS, and thus made him a multi-millionaire. And he founded a company called Fucient Media Venture. Now, he had partnered with Bischoff and agreed to put in $5 million of his own money. And between him and Bischoff, they were able to raise $62 million in capital to buy WCW from Time Warner, AOL Time Warner. But when AOL Time Warner decided to pull the television slots from TNT and TBS, the deal was dead. There was really nothing for them to do if they didn't have the television opportunities to showcase the product. And in fact, Eric Bischoff has stated that he was able to get a 50-episode commitment, which at the time was unheard of, from a channel called FX. But it just wasn't enough to convince Vidal that the deal would be sort of sound. So we fast forward to Vince stepping in, and they were desperate to get rid of WCW. AOL Time Warner was at this time. So Vince was able to buy WCW for a fraction of the price. I think it was rumored to be selling for under $5 million to Vince, whereas a few months earlier, they were looking at pretty close to $70 million. So that's how desperate they were to get WCW off their books. And that's where we land. That's where we arrive at March 26, 2001. It's the final Nitro, and Vince has just, over the weekend, purchased WCW.
Now, the number I've heard for years has been that he got it for just over $3 million. Is that just the tape library, or did he inherit contracts and then he had to pay them out of his money? Or this is where I don't fully understand it. Like, if he bought the company for $3 million, did he just essentially buy the tape library, the rings, the banners, any kind of WCW branded gear, or did the talent come along with that too? I don't fully understand that aspect of it.
My understanding is that, exactly to your point, the tape library, all the rights, all the trademarks, the ring, the sets, everything that's physically tangible from WCW was part of the sale. In terms of contracts, and this is something we'll probably get into down the road when we decide to do our Invasion rebooking, which is going to be a tall order. So we're kind of waiting on that one. You'll see that certain guys had guaranteed contracts. Some of the top tier talent were guaranteed contracts from from Time Warner, that were inherited by the AOL Time Warner merger. So certain talents, that's why you didn't see them appear in the WWF at the time, or WWE later on, for quite a period of time, because they were letting their contracts lapse. And I mean, it makes perfect sense. If you're going to have a guarantee of $3 million a year for another 2 years, then why would you break that to go and work for Vince on the promise of opportunity? I mean, I understand that you want to, keep your face fresh and in the spotlight, but especially if you have certain wrestlers that were maybe north of 40 and they had some nagging injuries from years of being on the road, why not heal up for 2 years, make $6 million, and then come back fresh when nobody's seen you for 2 years, especially if you're an established name, and make an impact. Whereas I think some of the younger talent, they had contracts, but they decided, instead of working through these maybe $150,000, $200,000 a year contracts, they decided to opt out of those to sign with Vince on the promise of the opportunity that he was affording on his television. And I know that Booker T and Diamond Dallas Page actually went with that proposal, as opposed to sticking with their AOL Time Warner contracts. My understanding is that they both got out of their contracts to go to the WWF.
Well, it definitely paid off for Booker. DDP, on the other hand, I can't say his WWF run was much to remember. I think the smartest person that stayed with the Time Warner AOL buyout would be Scott Steiner, because he proved when he came to the WWE, a year and a half later, he couldn't go anymore. And I know that that's going to get some heat from the Freakzilla fans out there and everybody who still does their math Steiner style. But let's be real. Scott Steiner, by this time especially, within the last couple of years, really started to become too bulky. He couldn't do the things that he once did. He couldn't do the Frankensteiners. He just looked like some loppy-legged, top-heavy dude who couldn't do anything properly. Like, he looked like he couldn't walk. He could do a push-up. You give him push-ups, no problem. But he couldn't barely walk. So he was the smartest one, because all of a sudden, he's gone for a year and a half. He negotiates a contract. Everyone's so excited to see him. What was it, Survivor Series 02 or 03?
2002 in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, when he debuted and just beat the living hell out of Matt Hardy and Chris Nowinski. Like, that was a strong debut, and everybody loved it. Then, to quote another podcast, and then the bell rang. And then we got the Royal Rumble and the No Way Out matches with Triple H, which were some of the worst main events in wrestling history. So Steiner is the perfect definition of somebody who, yeah, you made the right choice, bud. Take your $3-4 million and sit at home.
Yeah, I agree with that somewhat. I mean, I think that it's kind of harkens back to a podcast we did not too long ago. I believe it was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre rebook that we did, where we discussed how certain talents in the Attitude Era weren't, in your mind, great workers, or that they were great workers, but they weren't working to their ability. Like, say, for example, Steve Austin. Had Steve Austin come in wrestling like the ringmaster when he was Stone Cold Steve Austin, it wouldn't have worked. Stone Cold Steve Austin was a brawling, beer-swilling brute. And I kind of feel a little bit the same way about Scott Steiner's character in 2001. I don't know necessarily that him doing Frankensteiners and some of the stuff that he'd been doing in the 80s and early 90s would have worked with that character that he had. I do agree that his run was very lackluster in the WWE back in 2002, 2003. I don't know necessarily that he didn't have anything left in the tank. I think maybe it was to do with the fact that he was put with the wrong opponents. I mean, let's face it, he was facing Triple H, and we all know that Triple H was going to go over in that. We knew that he wasn't going to be putting Scott Steiner over. And if you look at that year, 2003, Triple H went over Scott Steiner twice, Booker T, Kevin Nash. Who else did he go over? He went over Goldberg that year. So he killed every major WCW star that year. He was the legend killer that year, not Randy Orton.
Well, okay, you can call them all legends all you want. Let's be real. Scott Steiner to me is not a real legend. The Steiner brothers are legends, but Big Papa Pump is not. I like I when I was a kid, I marked out for Scott Steiner. I'm not gonna lie, but you look at his 2003 run. Not only was he jobbing to Triple H, he was jobbing to Test, and that's nothing against Andrew Martin as a human being, but Test was not a character that was meant to be taking on somebody who's a former world champion and beating him cleanly. And they were fighting over the managerial services of Stacy Keibler. That's where Scott Steiner was by mid 2003.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I don't know if that necessarily is so much Steiner's fault. I really don't know where we land with Steiner. I mean, I do agree with you. No matter what, I mean, he had a very, very lackluster run at that time, and he really didn't do much else after that. So I do agree with you that that maybe he was the smartest of the bunch for taking that time off and healing up, and maybe that year and a half or 2 years that he was off was enough to kind of just slow his engine down, and he just wasn't able to regain what he had. I mean, if you look what he was doing in WCW in 2000 and 2001, he was still going at a pretty high level. He was looking good, and I do agree with you. He was top heavy, and he sort of had those, this might be a funny comparison, but I almost, like, in my mind, I'm almost thinking he reminds me of like Joe from Family Guy. Like, he had this really top heavy frame and these like dangly legs. So I do agree with you that
that is a perfect description. I could not have thought of a better one. Scott Steiner is Joe Swanson without the wheelchair. You are absolutely right.
All right, perfect. Well, we're not going to get any higher than that, so let's move off of the big booty daddy. I just wanted to touch on a couple of quick points before you and I get into this rebook here. There's a few moments that people kind of point to as moments or tentpole moments in WCW's history that they think were the kind of like the beginning of the end. Or, I mean, I think I just illustrated that there were a lot of different, fingers in the pie in terms of the demise of WCW. A lot of people just want to say that it was the booking or it was the on-air product, but it also had a lot to do with the culture backstage, this media.
Yeah. I don't think it was necessarily the fingers in the pie that had something to do with the death of WCW, but I do think that a finger was involved.
Okay. Yeah, I had a feeling you were going there, and I guess what I'm just trying to illustrate is that you can't you can't solely base it on what we saw on screen. There's a lot of other things at play as well behind the scenes that ultimately led to the demise. But to your point, I mean, that's the first one on my list is January 4th, 1999, the finger poke of doom. Like, what's your thinking about that?
Like, what do I think of the finger poke of doom in general? It's the dumbest, stupid, ridiculous, over the top. I hate it. Like, that's where I'm trying to get with this without saying bad words. I hate it. It was stupid. It was Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan trying to do what they did best at this time in WCW, and that was manipulate everybody else because they had these guaranteed contracts that had creative control in them, so they could do whatever the hell they wanted. And that's exactly what they did. They were like, why the fuck do we care about these people out here in southern United States? We can do whatever we want. We made millions of dollars. They just gave us even more money by spending the money on these tickets. So let's give them the most ridiculous moment in pro wrestling history. The finger poke of doom. Just saying it is dumb. The fact that that's what it's called is dumb. Did they coin that term or did we coin that term as wrestling fans? Because I don't even know the answer to that one, but if it was us, we should all be ashamed of ourselves.
I don't know the answer to that concretely. I suspect it was probably like an IWC term, an internet wrestling community term, and it probably just got adopted into being the sort of recognized name for it now. And it just like everybody's kind of like just added it to their wrestling vernacular as that's what it's referred to as now. I do hold out some. I agree with you 100%. It was absolutely idiotic and ill-conceived. I do hold out a small candle of hope that maybe it wasn't necessarily for the reasons or the motivation that you think it is, and that's the narrative that's been pushed for years and years and years. Is that it was just Nash and Hogan just trying to exert ultimate control over the business and showing that they can do whatever.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Like, I get where you're going with this, but if you weren't the giant Kevin Nash fan that you are, or if it was somebody else that you aren't the biggest fan of, would you still be thinking the same way, or do you only think that way because you want to give them the benefit of the doubt because you're such a fan?
No, it's not because of my fandom of Kevin Nash. I just look at it logically. Like, okay, if Nash was doing this to be self-serving for himself, so he beats Goldberg, right, at Starrcade '98, and then turn around like the following Nitro, and then just does this job to Hogan with a finger poke. Like, how does that get Nash over? Like, if he's doing it to make himself the biggest star in the company, he's doing it wrong.
I think at this point they knew that they were not going to get any bigger than Hulk Hogan, period. Like, they had nobody of that star power. They tried with Goldberg.
They had Goldberg. They didn't try with Goldberg. They had
no. But to get to the level of stardom that Hulk Hogan was, the everyday name, the household name, Goldberg is the closest thing that they ever came with. I'm not saying Goldberg wasn't over. He was completely over, but I don't think he was the household name that Hulk Hogan was in essentially from 1985 onward. Like, you look nowadays, there are still kids who are, like, my nephew, for example, is, I believe, under 10, and he knows who Hulk Hogan is. Like, there's still, everybody in the world knows who Hulk Hogan is. Not everybody in the world knows who Bill Goldberg is.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, you're looking at that, Monday morning quarterbacking it. I kind of feel like you and I both lived through this time, and you and I both know that at this time, Goldberg was pretty close to a household name. So I do feel like when they cooled his jets at Starrcade, that was the point of no return for him. I mean, we've talked about this as well, that once his streak was over in '98, he never really did much after that. Like, I don't really remember a whole lot of him in '99. I remember matches that he had, but there's nothing that really sticks out to me as far as like being super memorable. Same thing with 2000, 2001. Once you killed that
No,
streak,
just kind of when he busted open his hand by punching through the glass, and when he speared Bret Hart, and when he kicked Bret Hart in the head. Those are really, and that's not me trying to sound like an asshole towards Bret, because the spear wasn't a bad thing against Bret. That was actually Bret doing a good thing. That's the only things that I think about when I think about Bill Goldberg after the streak.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's my point. So I'm not saying that the streak should have ended, or shouldn't have ended rather. I don't know if this was the time. I think a lot of people looking back on it think that it wasn't. In fact, I think that you should have maybe held off on that Hogan win at the Georgia Dome for that Nitro on July 6, 1998, and built to, maybe you have Hogan and Goldberg. We talked about this on our Starrcade 1997 episode, that they should have held off on that match until Halloween Havoc. Halloween Havoc 98. I mean, you get rid of that Warrior match, and then you have Hogan versus Goldberg. You build up to it for months and months, the whole summer. He's running through the NWO, and then finally, after all these roadblocks, he finally gets his hands on Hogan. That would have been, I think, one of the biggest draws in the history of wrestling in the 90s if you had waited and built that for 6 months, as opposed to announcing it 4 days earlier on Nitro or on Thunder and then having it on Nitro. I mean, they sold, I think, like 15 or 18,000 tickets between those two dates, between the Thursday and the Monday, just based on that. So imagine the build, imagine the buy rate that they would have gotten had they waited. Like, it boggles my mind.
I love the fact that not 10 minutes ago you were telling me that I was the Monday morning quarterback, and here you are being the biggest one ever there. It's like, yeah, hindsight is hindsight. We all know that should have happened, but unfortunately it didn't. Now, when we talk about Goldberg's streak and what you said earlier about did it get ended at the wrong time, absolutely it did. Not only the wrong time, but also the wrong person. I look at Goldberg's streak pretty much the same way that you look at the Undertaker's streak. Should it have ended? Yes, absolutely, it should have ended. Were either of them ended by the right person? Absolutely not. I think with the Goldberg one, they should have had their next investment. Like when you think of WCW and their own stars that they made themselves, there's really only three that come to mind, and that's Sting, Goldberg, and DDP. So why not make this the chance to start building your next star and have them be the one that defeats Goldberg?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And that's sort of my point. I didn't mean to go back into the Monday morning quarterback mode, but I was just trying to illustrate my point by example is that, Goldberg, once you cooled his jets with that loss to Nash, and you're right, Nash was not the right guy. Now, Nash was super over at this time, but he wasn't the right guy to end the streak. And he wasn't the right guy to take the title off him. So I just think that as far as people being over, had they not killed Goldberg at that time and his streak, his momentum, that's really what it is. Ultimately, at the bottom line, the end of the day, that's what happened, is they killed Goldberg's momentum. Even if I don't even know, like, don't put the title on him then. And just, I don't know. Anyways, you're right. We're getting too far into the weeds on the rebooking of this angle, but your point is taken. I think it's just Hogan obviously is the bigger name for sure. Absolutely. But had they not done what they did with Goldberg at that time, we might be talking about it differently today. So my next point of history that a lot of people point to as a big deal in the history or the demise of WCW is September 10th, 1999, when Eric Bischoff actually goes home. He was sent home by Dr. Harvey Schiller, who was his boss, and he was then off until the beginning of 2000 when they called him back. But he has always said, he being Bischoff, that he thinks that the best time for him to have gone would have been in the summer of 1998, based on what was going on behind the scenes with the impending merger and standards and practices. Actually, what had happened was that the WWF at the time was running this very, very risque Attitude Era product, and with WCW and in the Turner organization, they had actually started to handcuff Eric Bischoff in terms of what he could or could not say and how he would present his product. He was the antithesis of what was being presented on Raw at that time in the WWF. So when you have this edgy product that the demographics of 18 to 34 or whatever the age demographic might be, young, hot-blooded males like you and I watching the Attitude Era with DX and Sable and Steve Austin and all this kind of stuff, and then you turn over to Nitro and you can't even call somebody stupid because it might offend people with learning disabilities. Their discrepancy there becomes, how do you compete with that? It's like, okay, I'm going to use like new generation angles to compete with Attitude Era angles. It just doesn't compute. And I think at that point he said that he thinks that would have been the best time for him to kind of ride off into the sunset. But nonetheless, he goes home September 10th, 1999. And then, of course, we go into our third point, which is October 3rd, 1999. Vince Russo signs. Where do you feel on that? Where do you land on that?
I mean, you can't argue the fact that the summer of 98 would have been the best time for Bischoff to go. The product was hot, and it was only about to cool off from then on. You look at what you just said with the Attitude Era blooming, with everybody wanting that, and then, unfortunately, with them being under the Turner umbrella and having to be so PC and so PG and unable to say things that they wanted to, and we end up with stupid shit like the finger poke of doom. Sorry to go back to that, but that's where you end up. Then you bring in Vince Russo, who thinks of himself as this creative genius who single-handedly booked the Attitude Era, which we all know is a complete crock. Vince Russo definitely did some good things. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think Russo is completely crazy, because he's not. He definitely did some great things, but we learned very quickly that when he went to WCW and he didn't have his big brother Vince looking over everything that he did, and he was left to his own demise to do whatever he wanted, it did not end up well. For God's sakes, we had a Judy Bagwell on a pole match. I think that sums up Vince Russo in WCW.
I think she was actually on a forklift, but your point is taken. Yeah, I will say this, and this is something I wrote in my notes that I really wanted to hammer home. I think WCW 99 is not nearly as bad as people think it is. I think it's much better than it's given credit for. I think that when you look at, finger poke of doom aside, if you look at the booking of WCW 99, it still made sense. It was still very watchable for me. And in fact, one of the years that I go back to the most, I really enjoyed WCW 1999. Up until the summer, it started to get a little bit difficult to watch, but I was still invested to it to a degree. And then I feel like from the time that Russo stepped in, and I am going to shit on Russo here because I feel that maybe like in the summer and early fall of 99, WCW was still salvageable in terms of booking, and you could still right the ship. When he started with his angles, and you see the difference from October 99 to say even November 99, the show is completely different, and it's unwatchable for me at that point.
I get what you're saying, but that being said, you look at the stars that started to come out at that era, and you started to get new faces. You started to get fresh faces. You weren't just seeing Lex Luger, Buff Bagwell, the NWO, Jeff Jarrett. Like, yeah, Jarrett was huge with Russo, but you also got Vampiro coming out, and I thought Vampiro was great. You get, I know I'm going to get so much shit on this one, but you get the ICP brought in. And were the Insane Clown Posse good wrestlers? Absolutely not. But do they have a following unlike almost anything? Yes. Those juggalos are hardcore, and they're going to do whatever the hell they can to support their guys. So you bring them in. All of a sudden, you're getting all that fanfare coming over. So it's not mainstream media per se, but it's a whole new set of eyes on the product. So I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing.
No, I don't think it was a bad thing either, and I also don't think that it was a bad thing to elevate younger talent. I will never fault Russo for that. I will never not give him credit for trying that. But the way he went about it was so unbelievably just incoherent in terms of the way that he was trying to he just went from basically having these established stars that were on the program and then taking them and having them be marginalized by these younger talents so quickly. Was no real.
That's exactly what that's exactly what my next point was going to be. Was yes, he was elevating younger stars, but then he was also just burying everybody who had been there forever, or not even forever. Like, you look at somebody like, was Hulk Hogan potentially over the moon in '99? I mean, it's hard to say considering he still had such a solid run in 2002 in the Fed. But yeah, he probably was. But booking him in a really, really lackluster feud with Billy Kidman made no sense to me whatsoever. Doing the whole shitting on Flair, shitting on Luger, like Nash, like all these guys that had been there and helped make WCW what it was, it was absolutely ridiculous. And then they bring in Bret Hart. Or no, Russo wasn't there when Hart got brought in, right? He came long after. But either way, like, he treats those guys like they're just these old used up donkeys that have served their purpose, and now it's time to put them out to pasture. And we're going to all of a sudden build the company around Sean Stasiak and Chuck Palumbo.
Well, and that's exactly my point. So I have no problem with Booker T being world heavyweight champion. Make him world heavyweight champion all day. But have him go over on someone who means something. When you diminish what all these established stars have in terms of their drawing ability and their worth in the eyes of the audience, it's like a grandfathering in. Like, you have to use the established stars to get the young talent over. If you just start having the young talent suddenly going over these guys for no apparent reason, and suddenly the paradigm is shift in terms of who's over and who isn't, who's important and who isn't, it's just too confusing for the audience. People are like, okay, well, I want to tune in to watch Hulk Hogan, or I know I want to buy a ticket to go see Buff Bagwell, or, well, I guess Buff Bagwell was still young, but younger, or you want to see your DDP or one of your favorites. I'm going to spend $100 to go to my town and go see my favorite. And then you see them just get eviscerated by younger talent and by the booker. It completely destroyed any kind of level of credibility in terms of the audience believing in what they're seeing. I mean, when you have Kurt Hennig, fighting for his job every week and then, having to become subservient to the powers that be, I just think there's a way to do it. There's a way to get young talent over by getting the rub from established stars. But when you completely obliterate the established stars' place on the card and their credibility, it just diminishes the entire product. And that's exactly what we saw. And just to go into
go ahead. But here, hold on. Here's one thing I just want to touch on that. And I know I sound like I'm flip-flopping between Russo's great and Russo's shit. But that being said, were these established stars going to be willing to put over younger stars? Like we've seen in the past with the creative control in their contracts that they don't want to lose. They don't want to put over somebody. Like, would we have had Billy Kidman pin Hulk Hogan? Absolutely not if it were up to Hogan. Like, he did not want to do jobs for anybody unless it was somebody in his inner circle. Unless you were bringing over Ed Leslie in his 17th incarnation of a character in WCW, Hogan wasn't losing. He was losing to the people that he trusted, that were in his inner circle, and that was it. Like the established guy, like I'll say that Ric Flair would always be okay to put over younger talent. We know that. He had no problem doing it. He lost to some people he probably shouldn't have, but he had no problem doing it. Whereas Hogan would have freaked out. I don't think Nash was all about doing it. Scott Hall was too drunk to know what the hell was going on. It was one of those situations that you were damned if you do and damned if you don't by that point.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I think it depends on the talent. I also think it depends on how the whole creative is presented. I don't necessarily think that Hogan would be against putting over younger stars if the creative made sense. I mean, how they booked it in 2000 with Kidman was atrocious. I mean, a lot of people point to the fact that that's why we never did see the Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan match. I know for me personally as a fan, that's maybe my number one match that I never got to see that I've always wished I could have. There's a lot of people that don't feel that way. I know yourself included more than likely feels that way. But there's a lot of people that point to the fact that they think that that's the reason why we never saw that match both in the Fed or in WCW on a big stage was because Hogan didn't want to do the job to Bret. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I have my suspicions, but I don't know for sure, so I'm not going to say one way or the other. But to your point, I mean, I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I think that, again, not because I'm a mark for Nash, but I think that Nash would have put over younger talent, if it made sense. And I think that's a lot of times the sticking point for guys is it's not so much about who they're putting over. Does it make sense? And maybe there's a lot of that element as well of I'm just here to collect a paycheck. I get that. But I also think that some guys, they just need for it to make some semblance of sense for them to do it.
I get what you're saying. I just also know that we've heard in different shoot interviews from some of these stars themselves that they were just there to make a paycheck. By the end of it, they did not give two shits about the company. They had their big money guarantees. They were going in. They were using their creative control for all the wrong reasons. So at this point, even though they say they didn't care, they were going in, refusing to lose, collecting their $2 to $3 million a year, and making the product even worse. And they're supposed to be these guys that love wrestling, love the product, all this, all that. Bullshit. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I still to this day do not believe that Hulk Hogan is a fan of the product, that Kevin Nash is a fan of the product, that Lex Luger is a fan of the product. I don't think any of them ever were. I think that the ones that were the fans of the product were your Eddie Guerreros, your Chris Jerichos, your Rey Mysterios, your Dean Malenkos, the ones that would go out there and put on the 5-star matches and then get shit on and have the big guys just completely squash any momentum that was going against them, which we all saw happen because they all jumped ship to the WWF.
Yeah, no, I can't argue with that. I mean, I don't know what's going on in their minds, so I can't really speak to what you're saying. I will say that in a way and in a sense, that formula was working. I mean, they say there's that saying that the candle that burns the brightest is the first one to go out, or so paraphrasing something to that effect. Or the candle that burns the brightest lasts the least, or whatever that euphemism is. I think that you can say that formula of having the top guys run roughshod over the promotion worked for a couple of years, and that was the hottest thing in wrestling, and that's what made Nitro so successful. But at a certain point, people get tired of it. I mean, Jericho has said to me, or so not said to me, but has said about WCW that he thinks it's neat that you get Hogan and Piper. You get Hogan and Piper once, that's awesome. It's so cool, and then Piper gets the win. And then you see Hogan and Piper again and again and again. And eventually it's just like, I don't want to see it anymore. I've seen it. So that's absolutely has a lot of merit what you're saying. And I do agree with you. I want to just get
But it's also sorry to cut you off. I know we're running real long today, but I just got one more thing to say.
We have time for this one. We carved out time, so we were good.
It's not just WCW that did that. Like, you look at the WWE, and how many times was John Cena shoved down our throats where we didn't want to see him anymore? You look at TNA, back when Jeff Jarrett was the owner and the world champ and everything like that. Nobody wanted to see him anymore. It happens repeatedly. It's probably going to happen in AEW down the line, too, with either a Cody Rhodes or... Yeah, he's really the only... Or, to be honest with you, Chris Jericho. I am so over Chris Jericho at this point. He looks like he just shouldn't be in the ring anymore. He's bloated. I heard somebody say, I think it was actually Tyler and Mike that said this on their show, that you look at the Nia Jax thing that happened where she was like, oh, my hole, and everyone's freaking the hell out. But if Chris Jericho had said that on AEW, it would be the top-selling T-shirt on Pro Wrestling Tees, which is an utterly ridiculous thing to say, but that's where Chris Jericho is, in my opinion, is he is almost a parody and a joke of himself these days.
Yeah, I think that it made sense for him to be the first champion of AEW. I think he's in a pretty good spot right now. He's trying to get the younger guys over in the inner circle and things of that nature. So I do think he's in the right place right now where he's trying to elevate younger talent. But I do agree that maybe his role, as prominent as it is, I don't know. It's hard for me to say because I just feel like he's doing it for the right reasons, as against to what we're talking about now with WCW and some of the stars back then. So I think that he's in the right place, and it makes sense for him to be in a certain position on the card so that he's able to elevate these talents. And I think that he's doing it the right way. He's learned from the mistakes that he's seen in the industry in the past. But I just want to get to two more quick points, and then we'll get into the rebook. Thanks so much, by the way, folks, for listening to us. This was actually something that I've been really looking forward to, and I know that Tyrone's been looking forward to talking about it as well. I think when we both kind of realized, as we said from the top of the show, that once we sort of really started thinking about this show, it was kind of important for us to really get into a deep dive here so that we could really provide some context and have a really, really good spirited conversation before we get into this rebook that I am very anxiously awaiting. So the next point that I want to get into here is actually October 24th, 1999, and that's at Halloween Havoc. Now, in this particular show, it was billed to be Hulk Hogan versus Sting. And of course, for those of you that haven't seen the show or haven't seen it in a while, we see Sting come out first with his Metallica music, Seek and Destroy. He's got the World Heavyweight Championship around his waist. Then Hogan's music hits for about a minute. Then it stops. Then it hits again for about a minute. Then it stops. Then a third time. Then finally Hogan comes out dressed in street clothes. And he talks to Sting for a few moments in the ring. And then he just lays down. And Sting pins him, and Hogan gets up and leaves, and that's the last we see of Hogan for quite a while. This was all Vince Russo. This was the beginning of the work shoot booking, and this, to me, is something that absolutely was a big contributing factor in the viewership going down, by large margins through a very short period of time. When you start hot-shotting and doing worked shoots on a weekly basis, especially on pay-per-views where people are paying money expecting to see this show, and every week you are doing these worked shoots, at a certain point, people just don't give a shit anymore. and I'm sorry, I don't normally swear on this podcast, but this one gets me hot. It really bothers me that you're going to start doing these work shoot promos and angles to try to get stuff over. It's like band-aiding something. It's a very temporary fix. And again, when you do it all the time, eventually people just start going, you know what? They don't care. Neither do I.
I mean, what you just said is so true about the work shoot promos, but this was the first one, really, of this era. And by this point, I already didn't care. You see Hogan come out in street clothes and lay down and then get up and leave. Again, I don't necessarily know if I believe that it was the work shoot or if this was just Hogan being like, I'm fucking done. I've had enough of Russo already. He's treating us like shit. And to be honest with you, Sting wasn't the kind of person that needed Hogan to put him over, which makes me think that's why Hogan was okay for laying down for Sting. He was the poster boy of WCW from essentially like 1990 onward, like 89, 90 onward. And now he's just having the biggest name in the entire business. I know that there's debate there. It's Hogan or Austin, but for me, it's Hogan. And he's the biggest name in all the business, and he's just laying down for him. I don't necessarily know if I believe the work shoot angle or if I just believe that Hogan was done. Hogan was getting his paycheck. He didn't really care. He had fulfilled his dates for the year, and he was just done. He was under a huge contract. He was going to keep making his money. He didn't need to be there all the time. And that's where we are. And Russo had enough of his shit. Hogan had enough of Russo shit. It was just a combined thing of, cool, we're out.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I just, not to, poke holes in your theory, but basically what you just laid out is what was supposed to happen at Bash of the Beach on July 9th of 2000. That's my final point here that I've written down. So I do believe that this particular angle was a work shoot. It was supposed to be something to give Hogan some time off, and he was going to come back fresh. Whereas in July 9th of 2000 at Bash at the Beach, it was supposed to be Hogan versus Jeff Jarrett. And you have the two of them reaching a creative impasse. Bischoff was back involved at this point. He had been involved in the early portion of 2000, had come back, and we had seen that god-awful New Blood versus, I believe it was Millionaires Club angle, which was just horrible. And then we move on into the summer of 2000. And from my understanding, it was supposed to be, or rather Russo wanted for Hogan to do the job to Jarrett. And Jarrett was very much for this, obviously. Hogan wasn't sold on the creative. And we had both Russo and Bischoff kind of sharing equal footing in terms of their power with creative. So it was somebody named Brad Siegel who actually had to make the final call. He was an executive for WCW, for Turner rather, and he was involved at this point to kind of try to cool off some of this infighting. And he made the call to go with Eric Bischoff's idea, which was for Hogan to go over, but or rather not to go over, but the whole idea of the angle was that Hogan was going to get screwed, and then he was going to go away with the World Heavyweight Championship, and they were going to crown a new World Heavyweight Champion, and then eventually do a tournament to crown a new champion. And then when the new champion is crowned, then Hogan comes back and says, no, I'm the real champion. Kind of like the Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon thing from WrestleMania 10 in a kind of roundabout way. And ultimately what happened was that there was a big argument in the back, and Hogan did the job to Jarrett as it was laid out. So Hogan laid down, and this was part of the angle. And then ultimately after that, this is when the wheels really fall off, and Russo comes out and cuts that promo that we've all seen. For those of you that haven't seen it, I highly recommend you Google it. Vince Russo promo, Bash at the Beach 2000. Check it out on the WWE Network, or Google it and watch a clip on YouTube or wherever it might be. It was scathing. It was a shoot, and Hogan was irate. In fact, this was the last time we'd see Hogan in WCW, and he actually won, if I have my numbers correct, I think somewhere in the tune of around $5 million in a defamation suit because of the way that he was eviscerated by Vince Russo on this pay-per-view. So that, to me, is another...
Vince Russo fully called him a piece of shit on pay-per-view.
He did. He absolutely did. And that was, to me, another big point of contention here. So for us to talk about Halloween Havoc and say, okay, maybe it was a work shoot, maybe it wasn't, and it was the first one, fair enough. But at this point, it was a little under a year since he'd been in, and you have this kind of stuff on pay-per-view when people are spending, $30, $35, I think at that point for pay-per-view, and to be delivering this kind of product. And then on top of that, having to hear that scathing shoot promo that he cut on him, you really start to lose audience credibility here. And I think that this was a big contributor to the viewership continuing to dwindle.
See, I think that I don't think you're wrong in the fact that this is one of the big reasons as to why it happened, but I think legitimately in Russo's mind, he thought that he was doing the right thing. He was going out there, he was trying to create some controversy. He was trying to make it seem like that it was like it was a real promo, but he was trying to make it feel real and make everybody believe that this is what's going on and that Hulk Hogan really is a piece of shit and he doesn't want to put anyone over. And he worked himself into such a corner that he couldn't get out of, and they never, ever recovered from it. So to a degree, Vince Russo is kind of the reason why WCW is dead. I guess that's the point you've been trying to make all along, isn't it? And I'm just now finally coming to it.
No, I'm not saying that Vince Russo is the cause of it. I'm just saying that he contributed. What he did was, in my mind, he accelerated the demise in that sense that they were starting to lose traction throughout 99, and it was starting to slow down. I think it was still at a point in the summer of 99 where you could have turned it around. What he did was he just poured gas on the fire. And so ultimately, what are your thoughts about what we've discussed in these points here? Do you have any final thoughts about what we discussed before we get into the rebook?
I'm pretty sure that every single one of my thoughts I conveyed while we were talking about it. But yes, from what it sounds like, it's a combination of Bischoff sticking around too long, Russo being brought in, and just standards and practices kind of getting in the way of helping create a healthy rivalry with the WWF. By this point, as you said, they couldn't be saying what they wanted to say. They couldn't do what they wanted to on national TV, so they had to go to pay-per-view and pull out all these stupid, absolutely ridiculous promos and bullshit that Vince Russo was known for, and all of a sudden they're on pay-per-view so they can say bullshit and this and that, whereas if they're on TNT they'd be like, oh, Hulk Hogan, you're a stupid poopy head because we can't say what we really want to say. So yeah, I mean, I got to give it to you when you say it. You did your research right there, kid. We all know where the downfall of WCW was, who it was, what it came from. I think it's time we start talking about this episode of Nitro. Why don't you run everybody down where it was, all that fun jazz?
Absolutely. Now, I just wanted to ask you quickly before we get into that. Did you want me to go match for match here, or I just have a feeling you've completely obliterated what's actually happened? So I'm just going to talk about where it's from. Where it's taken place. Obviously, that's the same thing.
You can totally... No, you know what? Go match for match, because let's see what I did, okay?
Okay, that sounds good. Should I just get into a brief history about WCW first, or?
Yes, please.
I think I just did that, pal. I think people are just get to the rebook. Come on, let's go. Okay, just to refresh your memories, just because I said at the top of the show, we were at the Boardwalk Beach Resort, Panama City Beach, Florida. And it was on March 26, 2001, the final Monday Nitro. Now, we open with a segment featuring Vince McMahon. I'm talking about the acquisition of WCW. This is from Cleveland, Ohio. The Raw's War was taking place there. This was the go-home edition for the Raw going into WrestleMania 17, which a lot of people believe is the greatest WrestleMania of all time. So, other than that, I mean, we've just gone through how we got here. So why don't I just let you get into it? We have this opening segment with Vince. Where are you taking me?
Well, the opening segment is staying the same with Vince. And I'm just going to lay it out there right now. The ending segment with Vince and Shane is there as well. So my rebook is going to stop before we get to that because none of that changed. And I don't think that we need to go over that at all. Am I correct in that?
No, I think it's fine. Again, I think anybody listening to this podcast probably knows the history and doesn't really need a refresher. So I think you're fine just rebooking match for match, and then you can maybe talk a little bit about maybe your inspiration, how you got there, how you wanted to kind of celebrate WCW, or maybe you didn't. I don't know. The first match is Booker T versus Scott Steiner. This is a unification match for the World Heavyweight Championship.
Whoa. The show opens with Ric Flair cutting a goddamn promo, just like it did in 2001. That is staying the same, and that is setting up the fact that the main event is staying the same as well, with Sting and Ric Flair.
Okay. Yeah, my apologies. I did gloss over that. My bad. That was a very, very good promo. It was maybe a little long for me, but I thought it was good. It was for the final Nitro, you can go an hour with Ric Flair if you want. Am I okay to get into the first match on the card?
Yes, you can.
Alrighty. Booker T defeated Scott Steiner in a unification match for the WCW United States Championship and WCW World Heavyweight Championship. What do you got for me, pal?
So I still have Booker T versus Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. Steiner. But this one's not a unification match. This one's just for the world title, and it still has Booker T going over. Same finish, same short match, lazy-looking Scott Steiner taking the bookend. Bam, bam. There you go. Booker T's your champ. I think it makes sense because going forward, like I kept the whole Night of Champions theme with this episode, and I kind of looked at it not knowing what was going to happen, but when you look at the talent that was on the roster, you could kind of get an idea of who might be going over. So I kept Booker T as the champ, thinking that there was a good, strong chance that he would have gone to the WWF anyway. Now, Immediately following that, though, Booker T celebrating, he gets attacked by Lance Storm. Lance Storm now calls him out, wants a U.S. title match right then and there. And because it's WCW in 2001, why the hell not? So you have Lance Storm going one-on-one.
Or Raw in 2021.
That's fair. Not much has changed in 20 years. So you have Lance Storm going one-on-one with Booker T for the U.S. title. And guess what? The U.S. Championship is coming back to Team Canada.
I like it. I like that a lot. I really like the idea of Lance Storm getting a championship out of this. I mean, he would show up in the Fed. So, and you definitely, I don't think that you needed to have Booker T come in with both championships. I mean, let's face it, based on how they booked the invasion angle, and as we alluded to earlier, we're going to rebook that ourselves at some point. We're just still trying to figure out the mechanics of it right now. The championships really didn't mean a whole lot in the actual invasion angle. I mean, they were there, but no, this is good. I like that he's winning a championship on the final show. Good job.
Well, thank you. Now, what I'm going to go into next is every single time on this episode where you see Vince McMahon in an office, whether he's on the phone or oogling Trish Stratus or whatever bullshit that man was doing at the time, we're going to replace all of those with important Nitro moments. So the first one that I have, it's kind of fitting that it's the very first Monday Nitro in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Mall of America. But we don't talk about that part. We just talk about the fact that Lex Luger shows up right there at the end of the episode, just staring at the ring at the main event going on. I think that is
absolutely
one of the most defining Nitro moments ever.
Well, it set the pace, it set the tone, the tenor for the show. I mean, you want to talk about live, you want to talk about a Monday Night War, I know it's a term nowadays with the kids. I mean, I'm pushing 38, so I'm not really a kid anymore. I'm not old, but I'm not young. We got, they call it shots fired. And I mean, this was a shot fired for sure. He had actually competed, him being Luger, at a house show the night previous in St. John's, New Brunswick, Canada. And so he was expected, I believe, at some point this week to go and shoot the opening Raw package that they had. Do you remember that Raw package where they were all wrestling on the roof of Titan Tower and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, Raw on the Roof is exactly what it's known as.
Yeah, so Luger was supposed to be there, but ultimately he wouldn't re-sign his contract, and that's why he wasn't scheduled to be there until later on. And then ultimately it turned out that he had just taken off, and that was his last contractual obligation. And so there he shows up on Nitro September 4th, 1995, and the rest is history.
Now, before we get into the next match, I do have a couple of notes here that I just want to bring up, and that is this arena is ridiculous. This spring break, maybe what? If you had to guess how many people were there, what would you say? Maybe 2,500, 3,000, somewhere around there?
Yeah, and I don't even know how many of them were actually wrestling fans. It seemed like a lot of them were just shit-faced sitting around just watching what was going on the beach.
But the thing that I have written down here about this era was the sponsors of this episode. And that is nothing to me screams 2001, like your sponsors being America Online and 1-800 Collect.
Yeah. I was almost half waiting for like a Surge or an RC Cola commercial, but no, or Pep Boys maybe. But
I think it would have been Jolt Cola at this era.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Jolt Cola was one with super amount of caffeine, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was essentially just like drinking fucking rocket fuel.
Yeah. No, it definitely. And you know what? It's funny you bring that up because I watched this event on Saturday morning, and I was having my coffee and stuff, and not really thinking anything of it. But then I thought about my girlfriend, who's a little bit younger than I am, and watching these commercials and being like, I wonder what she must be thinking. Like, if we watch this right now, what she'd be thinking, like what this is, because it's so natural for me to watch it, and you as well. But in the context, seeing these old commercials is a lot of fun on the WWE Network as well, because AOL, well, obviously they owned Time Warner, so it made sense for them to be on there. But it was just a funny commercial. I think they still had dial up and stuff they were talking about, so it's just a crazy.
Well, that's the weird thing to think, is that when we were growing up, when we were teenagers, you had to use your phone modem to get on the internet. Like, kids these days would have no idea what the hell that was. If they heard that annoying noise that it was when it was dialing up, they'd probably just give up and go somewhere else.
Yeah. No, that's true. I just, it's like when I was in my formative years, and I was my first like wrestling crush was Sunny, and trying to find like Sunny pictures online, it would usually take like a good 2 or 3 minutes for the picture to actually just like materialize and get in a full focus when you'd search online in your search engine. You didn't even have Google back then, so I don't even know what the search engine was, but maybe it was Ask Jeeves or something.
Now that we've had our Statler and Waldorf moment of the day, I think we should move on about talking about back in our day.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you went from that moment, the opening Nitro, the first Nitro, to the next match on the card, which is Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman defeating Shannon Moore and Evan Courageous and Kaz Hayashi and Yang for the WCW Cruiserweight Tag Team Championship. And I got to be honest with you, Tyrone, until I watched this match and a couple of events beforehand, I had no recollection of there being a WCW Cruiserweight Tag Team title.
I still don't. And I watched this too, and I still have no idea why it was there when it came to. It was just a bad championship. So this match doesn't exist. I went straight to a match for the Cruiserweight Tag Team titles. And I had the Young Dragons defeating Kid Romeo and Primetime Elix Skipper. I thought that it didn't need 2 segments. There was no need for all of that nonsense. Could you have gotten Rey Mysterio and Kidman in a tag match? Sure. Are they going to be on my card later? I don't know, maybe. But I think that the Young Dragons were a fantastic team. We know Kaz Hayashi is incredible. He's been around for years. And then you have Yang, who became, if I'm not mistaken, his name originally was Akio when he was in a group with Tajiri and Sakota. And then he went on to become Jimmy Wang Yang and did his weird cowboy Asian gimmick, which I thought was hilarious.
It was, yes.
I'm not going to lie. I have no idea, and I didn't bother to look him up because I don't care that much. I don't know who the hell Kid Romeo is. Even looking at him, I didn't remember him.
Yeah, I didn't care either, to be honest with you. I watched the show. So I'm gonna ask you something here, and I think I know the answer, but I just want to just so I'm clear. Do you feel, as I understand, it's Night of Champions, and you have to get the champions on here and all that kind of thing, but do you feel like for the final episode of Nitro, you still want to be showcasing, young upcoming talent, or do you want to show and have people wrestle on the show that are established Nitro fixtures and established WCW stars to give people that kind of, I guess, happy ending? I don't mean that in like a funny way. I just mean like legitimate, like finish with a warm feeling in their stomachs, and their hearts are full. Having watched the final Nitro, there's a bit of melancholy there, obviously, but you at least get to see your favorites one last time. Like, where do you land on that? I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but
Like, are you asking me if that's what I would do or if that's what I wanted to see?
I guess both or one or the other. I mean, just for me, like, because I understand why you put Kid Romeo on the card, but
no,
I don't know who
but
he
also
was.
I kept the Night of Champions thing for a reason, and that's because it would have been stupid for the WWF to not do something with WCW, whether it kept it going, did an invasion or something like that. So you still needed champions. So I
Right.
wanted that to be fresh in people's minds that this was the last episode. This is who the champions were. When you talk about like all the old school guys and all, there's a reason why Disco Inferno and Alex Wright, spoiler alert, are not on my card. They were staples of Nitro, but I don't think they needed to be here. I don't think they were going to get picked up no matter what. So I went more with showcasing the younger talent with a few older ones, you'll see going on. But
Yep.
I think it was important to show the younger talent that could have become something. Whether or not they did, that's debatable, but we'll talk about that once we keep going.
So it's more of just for you. It's more of just like, this is like, if we're going out, this is our final one. This is all of us, warts and all. This is WCW, for better or worse. You're going to see our young talent. You're going to see our older talent. This is what we're about. One more time.
Yeah, a bit of that, but also, to be fair, when you talk about the guys with the big money contracts, there's no way they were going to do this show anyway. I think we all know that.
I suppose. I mean, you could also look at it in the sense that, what happens when those contracts run out? If they have a bad showing here, they don't want to do business here, are they going to be brought in? I don't know. Some of them weren't. Some of them never came back. So I don't know.
I mean,
we'll see.
if it makes you happier, I can change it to Kid Romeo going over Kevin Nash.
No, I'm not arguing with your card, buddy. I just wanted to see where your mentality was at. That's all. So go ahead with your. Are you finished with the tag team match?
I am, but that brings us to Nitro moment number 2 on my list, which is when the current WWF Women's Champion Alundra Blaze returned to WCW under the name Medusa and just full on drop that title into a garbage can.
Yeah. That was a crazy moment. It was again another shots fired moment. I think they talk about how what a big impact it had on the business. I think in terms of it actually having a real effect on the WCW women's division going forward, it obviously had no effect. So the actual date that this took place was December 18th, 1995. And she came in and interrupted, I believe it was Eric Bischoff and Steve Mongo McMichael and Bobby Heenan on commentary.
I think, yeah, and for some reason, Mongo had his stupid little chihuahua with him that I'll never understand why that was with him.
Yeah, I don't remember what his name was, but she did yell at the dog, and then she just, I mean, it was an impactful moment. I mean, following up what happened with Luger and then going into this, it was a pretty big deal at the time, but they didn't do anything to follow it up. It was just another moment. I almost, like, in my mind, I half feel like, well, that's the reason she was signed, is just to do that. And she had the belt. And then you fast forward to what did she end up doing later on? The only time you really saw her after that was when she was being completely eviscerated by the Russo era, going out and Braun painting matches and stuff like that. Things that she was not all about. She was a worker and she could really go in the ring. So
Yeah, hindsight being what it is, it definitely wasn't a good idea because it hurt her career. She didn't get brought back into the WWE family until what, within the last 5 years?
2015, she got inducted in the Hall of Fame. Now, I don't
So
know if she would
so
have been.
6 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know if she would have been brought back, in the early 2000s. I think by the time WCW folded, she was actually really into the monster truck stuff. So I don't even know if she would come back to wrestle at that point. But certainly not for what they were presenting on WWF television with the aforementioned brawn panty matches and things like that. So no, it's a good moment to bring up for sure.
But she's also somebody that even now in 2021, and I guess looking forward to 2022, I could see her in the Royal Rumble doing like a quick spot. I think that would be fantastic.
I think so as well. She was involved with the Women's Evolution, the Battle Royal there, so I could see her doing a spot.
Yeah, and she was billed as a Lunder Blaze for that one too. She got brought back as her, not Medusa.
Yeah, I don't see her if she's involved with the Fed going forward. I don't see her ever being referred to as Medusa anymore. I mean, they might say it in commentary, also known as Medusa in WCW or whatever, but or of course she was in the AWA as well and in Japan. But I just don't see her ever being referred to as Medusa solely in the WWE. And I do believe that, if I'm not mistaken, there might be some correlation with AEW right now. She might be doing some stuff with them. But anyhow, we keep on getting into these rabbit holes. Which is fine. But yeah, that's a great moment to bring up. It was another shot across the bow from WCW to the WWF and to Vince.
Yep. It was. Shall we go on to the next one, which I have is my Cruiserweight Championship match?
You most certainly do. It's Shane Helms defeating Chavo Guerrero Jr. And I have to say, I love Chavo's entrance music here. It was a version of Eddie Guerrero's, but with a little electric guitar. It was almost like Carlos Santana jumped on and did a run-in on his theme music here.
I like that you keep the Latino there and drop some Carlos Santana, but I kept the match. It's one of the few that's actually, I can't say one of the few because there's a few that stayed. I changed the finish though. I have Chavo winning. I thought that the Guerrero name going over on the last Nitro made a lot more sense than the wannabe Nick Carter.
Yeah, no argument at all. I completely agree with that, especially because he was going to be going in and working with Eddie, not in the not too distant future. I think it wasn't too long after this that Eddie actually got released from the WWE, and then he came back, and I think it was April of 2002. But yeah, they would be reunited in the WWE, so it makes a lot of sense, especially with the history of the Guerrero name, to have Guerrero go over on top and come into the WWE as a champion makes all the sense in the world. So I have no argument with that whatsoever.
All right, I like it. So I'm just going to tell you straight up, we're going right into the WCW Tag Team title match that I have here, which obviously was changed. It's not Team Canada taking on Palumbo and O'Hare.
Team Canada being Lance Storm and Mike Awesome for reference sake.
Yes, because Mike Awesome is that great guy from Sarnia.
That's right.
No, we have Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Hare defending the tag team championship against Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Kanyon.
Ooh. Don't hate that. I like that a lot. Oh, the innovator of offense with the diamond cutter, gonna feel the bang. Just by the way, I have to say, watching late WCW, I can't imagine walking around with a T-shirt that just had big blue letters that said "bang" on it. I mean, imagine go to a bar and wearing that in 2000. You would have been in some hot water, I think. Or unless you're real catnip with ladies, maybe it would have worked out in your favor.
I've gone to bars wearing T-shirts that say "You suck" or wearing T-shirts that say "Can I get a hug?" or "I'm a hugger." So let's be real. It doesn't matter what the T-shirt says. If it's a popular wrestling shirt, I'm probably going to buy it.
That's very fair. But getting into this match, I like the idea. I think it's, again, indicative of what we've been talking about all show in terms of the right ways to get younger talent over. And you have the two established stars. I mean, Kanyon wasn't really old at this point, obviously. I mean, in terms of wrestling years, I'm not talking about life years or like actual ages, but in his wrestling years, he wasn't that old. And DDP was obviously a very established star. I don't know where you're going with this, but I like it.
I really toyed with putting the tag titles on Canyon and Page just so that we could avoid that horrible stalker angle that we had with DDP and The Undertaker. But I thought the smart thing to do was to keep them on Palumbo and O'Hare, showcase the younger talent. Again, probably going to get signed by the Fed, which they did. Neither of them really went anywhere, but neither did Canyon and Page with the Fed. So I thought, no harm, no foul. The younger guys getting the rub from the older guys kind of makes all the sense. And again, what you said earlier about older guys willing to do the job and putting them over, it helps go forward with that. It helps them get a good outlook by the WWE.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think you did a good job on that one too. It makes sense for them to go over as well. If that's the goal, is to showcase younger talent, then by all means, go for it. And I think that, based on the conversation we had a few minutes ago about, guys being willing to put over younger talent, I think DDP was definitely the kind of guy that would be very open to putting over younger talent. So I think that one makes sense, and I think that you did a good job on that one.
Well, I thank you, sir. And that brings us right into our Nitro moment number 3. It's kind of 2 nights combined into one, but it is when the Outsiders invade. Starts off with Scott Hall, promises that his buddy's coming. Next week, you get Kevin Nash right behind Eric Bischoff. Jay, I know you know the dates. I'm terrible with dates. What do you got for me on this one?
Well, we had May 27th, 1996 in Macon, Georgia was when Scott Hall debuted. And he came in through the crowd. And then, of course, you had June 10th, 1996 was when Kevin Nash debuted. So, yeah, I mean, very obviously, maybe the biggest moment in Nitro history to this point, without question, was these two guys coming in and forming the NWO.
I'm kind of trying to go chronologically with my Nitro moments. So if anything happened between number 1 and number 3, where we're at right now, just didn't matter. Let's just go with that, okay? Nobody needs to see friggin' Big Bubba Rogers and Glacier going at it one-on-one, so we're just going to skip all those moments.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That sounds fine with me.
Now for the surprise of this entire podcast, my next match is staying the same. It is Shawn Stasiak going one-on-one with Bam Bam Bigelow in 2001.
Yeah, watch the match. No thanks. But for the purposes of your rebooking, walk me through it.
Well, okay, let's call a spade right now. Bam Bam did not look good in this match at all. He looked out of shape. He looked over it. He wasn't into it. I did this again just to kind of showcase Shawn Stasiak, who, weirdly enough, when the invasion angle happened, I think was the only person to get brought back to the company. Of all people, they chose Meat. And I will never understand that. But I kept it. It was a showcase for Shawn. It was a showcase for Stacy to kind of show her microphone skills, or lack thereof, I guess, at the time. But I didn't hate it, and I'm going to put Bam Bam on a card anytime I can. You know that.
Yep. Yep, I'm fine with that. I think that you did good. I like that Bam Bam's on the card. I don't know. See, I get why you left it, but I don't know if this is a match that I would have on the final Nitro. I was really surprised it was there in the first place. I watched the Final Thunder going into this show, and they had set up a lot of angles. Like they had set up something with Shane Douglas as well. He was going to be going after someone. I don't remember who it was right now. You have to excuse me. And there were some angles that were set up for Monday that ended up happening, and others that just were completely dropped. I love the fact that Bam Bam's on the card, but I just don't feel it for the final Nitro having this match on there. I get why you left it, but not for me.
Well, I think the one thing that we forgot to touch on too is that this match, the loser was supposed to get a tattoo, and we never saw that tattoo happen in the ring. So that's kind of a bummer to me. I would have loved to see Sean Stasiak give Bam Bam a tattoo afterwards.
Oh, I agree. That would have been really funny, but obviously, for obvious reasons, it didn't happen, and obviously probably because of time constraints as well. So yeah, I didn't really see that one happening either. But yeah, again, I mean, I get why you left it on the card. I understand. I love seeing Bam Bam on any card, so I'm not mad at it.
Well, that brings us to our Nitro moment number 4. And Jay, before I get into this one, and I think you'll get why I'm asking you this, WWF has Madison Square Garden. That's the Mecca. Does WCW have an arena too?
I think looking at like the Jim Crockett era, like JCP, it'd probably be the Omni or the Greensboro Coliseum. Looking in WCW, if you're looking at a stadium, it's probably the Georgia Dome. But if you're looking at an arena, I think it's probably the MGM Grand.
Well, I don't know if this moment happened at any of those spots. I just want to get your opinion. Okay. But my moment number 4 is the Four Horsemen reunion. The night that Ric Flair gets brought back, Arn Anderson's in the ring, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko. Flair cries, like always, but he cuts a fantastic promo. And I thought that this was obviously not Flair's best promo, but maybe his best promo of the later half of WCW.
Yeah. I believe that was in Greenville, South Carolina. I don't remember. When was it? I don't remember exactly the date. September 14th, maybe? Yeah, it was. It was September 14th. He returned, and that was one of the biggest moments in Nitro history. Again, like you're hitting some really good moments here. Definitely a huge thing. He had that contentious relationship with Eric Bischoff, and Bischoff had actually sued him, and then he countersued him, being Ric Flair, and then you had Bischoff actually cut this shoot promo on the boys in the back. Allegedly, a lot of people have stipulated that this happened, talking about how he was going to starve out Ric Flair and his family, and that he was done. He would never see or hear from him again, and he was going to end up on the breadline and all this kind of stuff. So this ended up working into them, mending fences to somewhat of a degree, and then working an angle. I think nowadays they're on pretty good terms, but for a long time, this was a really, really hot button issue. And for this moment, when Flair came back after being off TV since, I think, of March of '98, so he'd been off for about 6 months. For him to come back was so huge, especially because Flair has talked about that if he had just waited and not gone back, he would have made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, but ended up coming back. And actually, a fun little side note on this is actually it was rumored right after this happened, the fallout happened, it was rumored the WWF was running a pay-per-view in Greensboro called Unforgiven. That was the main event, was Steve Austin versus Dude Love, their first encounter. And it was rumored that Ric Flair was going to maybe show up at ringside, or then otherwise swerve it and have Ric Flair at ringside with his son Reed, and just take a close up of Reed, put him on camera, and then sort of have Ric Flair like cut off to the side and talk about how Reed Flair was in the crowd and stuff. So just a fun little sidebar there.
I actually did not know that. That really would have been funny, though, if they just did it with Reed and, isn't he somebody's kid? Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, and Ric Flair would have been sitting beside him, and you would have seen like a quarter of Ric Flair's face or something.
Now, I don't know what the next match on the card is, but I can guarantee you it's not the next thing that I have booked here.
I believe the next match on the card is Rey Mysterio. No, sorry, it's Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman defeating Elix Skipper and Kid Romeo. Wait.
Well, we know that's not happening.
Yeah, so Kidman defeated Skipper, and okay, so this is very confusing. My apologies. I thought we were
No. You're not wrong. You had Kidman and Mysterio winning a triple threat to face them later. That's what happened.
Oh, I see. Okay, my bad.
So what I've done now is I've replaced that match with just 2 one-on-ones.
Okay.
Number one, I have Vampiro taking on AJ Styles.
Love it. Think it's great. AJ obviously.
And that's the thing. Like, Vampiro's going to go over, and it hurts nobody at this point. Like, AJ was a young upstart. Vampiro had the rub, and they're going to get a competitive match out of it. AJ's going to get in a lot of offense, but Vampiro's going to hit the nail in the coffin, and we're done. Vamp gets the go, and I think that Vamp is one of those guys that really could have done well in the Fed, but I don't know what the reasoning for him not going there was, but I would have loved to have seen it. He did really well. Like, him and Lucha Underground is some of the greatest stuff in professional wrestling. There's no doubt about that. But these days, he's not really doing much to my knowledge, unless you know something that I don't. He might be in AAA, but I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I like this idea of doing this as well. I think it's great. Do you have any idea, like in your mind, just like off the top of your head, why you think AJ wasn't signed with the rest of the talent at the time?
I really have no idea, but to be perfectly honest with you, I think it was for the better. Because I feel like if AJ Styles had been signed by the WWE in 2001, he would have gone the route of a Hurricane, or who else was small that got hired? Jamie Noble, Jimmy Wang Yang, all the Ultimo Dragon. All of these guys really went nowhere. The only ones that really stood out were Chavo Guerrero had a run as obviously the Cruiserweight champ, going into Los Guerreros, which built to ECW champion and La Familia, and then obviously Rey Mysterio. But for the most part, the Cruiserweights that were signed did not get the push that they should have gotten. Billy Kidman did, but again, only in the Cruiserweight division. So I think it's a really, really good thing that AJ did not get signed, that he went on to TNA, he went on to Ring of Honor, New Japan, built his name, and then came back as a fully established character.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. There's absolutely nothing I can add to that. I mean, you hit every nail right on the head with that. Yeah, I think going to the WWE at this time, or WWF, he would have been lost in the shuffle. He needed to find his own path and find his own way. So, and he eventually ended up getting there and becoming one of the biggest stars in the history. Well, maybe not the history of the company, but certainly one of the best workers in the history of the company. So yeah, I think you got it right.
Had he gone in 2001, they probably would have heard his Southern accent, and he would have turned into Matt Hardy's MFer instead of Shannon Moore, because he was Southern, just like Matt Hardy.
Yeah, either that, or he would have been put in like the Jamie Noble spot with Nydia or something.
Which, it's not the best spot, but Jamie Noble hit that motherfucker out of the park. There's no denying that.
He sure did.
So the other match that I have added, though, on top of this, sorry, not to cut you off, though, is I thought, what better way to end off the Cruiserweight division in WCW than to have a one-on-one match with Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman. Yes, they were the Filthy Animals, and they were best friends, but it's the last show. Why not go out and lay all the cards on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. And I could definitely see it being one of those, one of those matches where the bell rings and they slap hands kind of thing. And it's just, two buddies going out there and just tearing the house down. I totally get it. I like it a lot. This, I will say, I mean, I don't know if you're going to add more matches still onto this card. I'm not sure where you're going. It's starting to sound like an episode of 205 Live to me. And I'm not saying that in like a negative way. I just mean that it's a very, very cruiserweight heavy show, which is totally fine. You're opening with the heavyweights and then going into the cruiserweights and all that kind of thing. I guess you had Bam Bam and Stasiak in there as well. And you had the tag team championships, but there's a lot of cruiserweight stuff going on here, which is fine. I mean, that's one of the 10 poles of Nitro. That's what made Nitro what it was the cruiserweight division. One of the biggest factors for sure.
It's not only it's not only one of the temples and one of the biggest factors. Other than the NWO, it's the best fucking thing that Nitro ever did was the Cruiserweight division. So don't tell me that I'm sounding like a 205 Live episode, because that's a goddamn insult. I love 205 Live. I'm not shitting on that. But to the average person, saying you're on 205 Live is like saying back in the day you were on Saturday Morning Slam or you're going to be on Jacked or something like that. So watch your tone there, bud, okay?
Don't
I have
get
no
hot,
problem
buddy.
with putting the cruiser. No, don't tell me not to get hot when you're shitting on the fact that I'm putting a bunch of cruiserweights over. I'm sorry I'm not having Sid and fucking Kevin Nash having a power bomb contest. Grow up.
Yeah, I have no problem with the cruiserweights on there at all, buddy. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's a very cruiserweight heavy show. That's all I'm saying. I'm just busting your balls.
Well, the cruiserweight match is over. You ruined it. We're moving on to Nitro moment number 5.
Okay.
And that is the Georgia Dome. Bill Goldberg taking the heavyweight championship from Hollywood Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I mean, we already covered it pretty much in our previous portion of the show. We were setting up the final Nitro here with the history. I think we both agree that, yeah, it was a very pivotal moment in history, but maybe not the right time, the right place. I mean, who's to say, right? But I think I don't want to speak for you, but I think we both agree that it was just a horrible build to such a big moment.
It was one of the most defining moments in Nitro history, but yes, it was handled piss poorly. I will give you that.
Yeah, it should have just.
But
I think it should have been built into something a lot bigger for sure. And again, like we talked about earlier, if you'd waited a few months and had, I don't think that at this point Goldberg had really gone through a lot of NWO guys. It was just the fact that his streak was so hot that it made sense for him to be the number one contender. So, like, had you spent the summer,
I think he went through Norton, he went through Vincent, he went through Henning, but at the same time, which they actually did point out on this episode of Nitro, if you're the United States Heavyweight Champion, you're automatically the number one contender. Hence why Booker T was the number one contender to Scott Steiner.
Yeah, and that's the way it was back in the day with the Fed as well. I mean, do you remember the old Raw magazines where you used to see them like do the listing of like the number one contenders for each title, and it would always be that the Intercontinental Champion was the number one contender for the WWF Championship. Now they never actually pulled the trigger. You never saw Ahmed Johnson versus Shawn Michaels in '96, but I mean he was always touted as the number one contender.
I genuinely have no memory of that from Raw magazine, but I know it was a thing in PWI as I was growing up.
Oh yeah, they always had that in PWI as well. They had the top 10 stars from each promotion, and then they had the overall top 10 stars, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
But going from this moment, that brings us to our main event of this final Nitro of WCW, and that is one-on-one. The artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea going against Psychosis.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. It's Ric Flair and Sting.
I just wasn't sure if you meant like the main event in terms of like work rate, because it wouldn't have been that bad a match. But,
you mean in terms of 205 Live or in terms of normal wrestling or what?
Oh boy, I'm gonna be living with this one for a while, eh?
Well, yeah, you redeemed yourself with the women after I yelled at you about women's wrestling. Now you're all about cruiserweights. So I mean, fuck, what's next after this? Are we gonna harper on?
Are we gonna harper?
Harp on. Yeah, you caught me. Never mind. I got nothing else to say here. Anyway,
like Harper Collins, the book publisher, or
I'm really glad you went there instead of Stephen Harper. To be perfectly honest with you, or Harper. I
knew a kid in grade 4 named Harper, and he wore a lot of rainbow shirts. But
I mean, we could all just go read To Kill a Mockingbird, written by Harper Lee. You never know.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
This main event doesn't change. It's Flair and Sting. There's no other way that WCW could have ended their in-ring capacity other than with Flair and Sting. They were the ones that put them on the map. They kept it going. They were both there throughout everything. It's exactly who you have to finish off with. And even Jay is speechless at that one, so I think I won this one. There really is no one. Like,
no,
who are you going to put in there? Luger or Conan or Bagwell or Like there are other guys that you could have potentially put in there, but when you think of who was there from the beginning till the end, prominently featured, it was Flair and Sting.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that you have to look at it in the sense that it's not so much just WCW or Nitro. It's the overall journey. Like we talked about from the beginning of this podcast, we ran through the history of JCP, Jim Crockett Promotions, and being sold to Ted Turner, and Ric Flair and Sting were through it all. Obviously, Flair went to the WWF for about a year and a half, and that was a bit of an interruption in the service. But there's no two other guys you could have finished this show with. I really don't think so. I guess the only other guy you could maybe make an argument for, or the other two guys you could maybe make an argument for, are like Goldberg and DDP, only because they were both homegrown WCW talents that were there from the beginning and never gone anywhere else. So that maybe you could make an argument for it. But for me, 100%, it's Flair and Sting. Now, my question to you is Flair still wearing that Nitro t-shirt in this one, or is he just like regular Ric Flair?
I'm going to leave that one up to the imagination of the listener, because we know how Flair felt about himself at that point. So I don't want to body shame anybody in 2021. That's
fair. That's absolutely fair. We don't ever want to shame anybody on this show. This is a fun show for us. We're just trying to have a little bit of fun and enjoy every moment of it. So I think you did good. I was just taking a little crack at you there for the 205 live stuff. But I mean, I think that you hit every nail on the head. You definitely did an expose of what WCW was all about. You'd still got a couple of established guys on there. And of course you closed the show with the two guys that needed to close the show. So, without anything else that I can think of, I think we pretty much covered this. I'm pretty pleased with where we went with this. I really like how we covered the history, and I think that you did a really good job buttoning up WCW. Of course, you're going to keep the McMahon stuff, which makes sense. I understand why it's staying. But ultimately, I think we did a pretty good job here, bud. What do you think?
I think we did great. I think now, hear me out here on one thing. How cool would it have been if instead of doing Shane on Nitro and Vince on Raw, that we actually had Ted Turner come down to the Astrodome and give Vince the contract? Like, how incredible would that have been?
That would have been really cool. Like, really cool. Never would have happened in a million years. I mean, it would. Imagine if there was some kind of physicality involved, like Vince slapping Turner, or actually rather Turner slapping Vince and then hauling off up the ramp or something. Would have been hilarious.
Hey man, like 6 years later, 5-6 years later, you had Donald Trump and Vince McMahon get physical at WrestleMania. So never say never in the world of professional wrestling. We know this.
That's true. That's absolutely true. I just think the bottom line of this for me is, I think now that I'm sort of looking back on our episode here and thinking about what we talked about, I think the biggest travesty of this final Nitro is that it was so lost in the shuffle compared to the machine and the juggernaut of advertising WrestleMania 17, rightfully so. I mean, they'd bought the company, they could do whatever they want with it. But I think in hindsight, when both of us look back at this, it was just such a shame that this whole acquisition of WCW by the WWF and this whole Nitro and how quickly it all came together and all that kind of thing, that it was really just an afterthought. And I think that it deserved much better. One other question I just want to pose to you, just based on what I just said, is like, we saw ECW One Night Stand in 2005. Do you think that like a WCW One Night Only type event would have worked in, like, say 2004, 2005? Because I definitely think with the right people in play and having the right people available, like the top stars at that point were all available and that kind of thing, it would have been a huge success.
It probably would have been a success, but at the same time, you got to look at the fact that the biggest stars in ECW at the time were all either signed to the WWE or willing to work for less than $1 million a shoot. If you try to do a WCW event around the same time, you weren't getting your Goldbergs or your Lugers or your Jarretts for cheap because they were either signed somewhere else or not interested, or they were too old. That's the other thing about WCW. So many of their talent was over the age of 40 by the time they closed down that if you went another 5 to 10 years, they may not have been able to work as well. Would it have
Yeah,
worked? Do people want to see it? Yes. Would it have worked? I don't think so.
I think it depends when you did it. I mean, if you'd done it in 05, the same year that you did ECW, I think it would have been fine. It would have been 4 years after they closed. I think you would have still been able to get some good matches out of it. But unfortunately, it never happened, and so we just have to live vicariously through what we've seen on television. And thank God for the network in that regard, that we can go back and watch these shows, because I really enjoyed looking back on this 20 years later and imagining how things could have been different, and sort of seeing incrementally how things sort of degraded and all that kind of thing. So it was really, really fun for me to go back, and I'm really glad we did this episode, buddy, because I'm very grateful that we got a chance to take a real good deep dive into WCW. I think it deserves it. And I think that we did not to pat myself on the back or break my arm patting myself on the back, as Gorilla Monsoon would say. But I do want to pat myself on the back in that sense, that I think that we did it justice today for sure.
I like that you only say pat yourself on the back, you selfish prick.
I meant metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. I'm here too. Remember, I did the rebook. I contributed just because you talked for 80% of the episode, and then I chimed in here and there. But I still love you. Don't worry.
I didn't mean to talk through 80% of the episode. I was just trying to get through all the notes that I had here. My apologies if I was monopolizing the conversation. I certainly didn't mean to.
It's all good, bud. I've known you for years. I'm used to it. And the fact that we've
Jesus.
The fact that we've gone pretty much an hour past what we would normally go just shows that we both enjoyed this topic, and there was lots to cover, and I'm glad that we did it. And it wasn't just you and I sitting here going, oh man, we had to sit through another Texas death match, or what the hell was that shit?
Yeah. It was a lot of fun, and I think that maybe in the future we'll do some more of these deep dives on certain topics. I think that this has opened both our eyes while we're doing it, like in live time right now on the air. I think we both sort of realized that we enjoy getting into these granular details about certain things. So there might be more of these on the horizon. I'm not saying every week, but certainly, if the topic warrants it, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't get deep into the weeds on certain things. But with that being said, if you have nothing else to say on WCW, I'm going to table that for now. We're definitely going to revisit WCW at some point. But I have to ask you, Tyrone, now that you've rebooked this pivotal moment in history, what do you got on tap for me next week?
Well, I thought about this one long and hard. And then I was like, you know what? I'm tired of thinking. My brain hurts. I'm back to work. You put a poll up recently. We're going to do the winner of that one. We're doing Roadblock 2016.
That sounds phenomenal. I love that idea. We were going to do it as a bonus show, but we figured, you figured, I guess, that it was better to just go ahead and do it for next week's episode. And I'm totally down with that. We were both there for the event.
To be perfectly honest with you, we're both busy right now and don't have all the time to record bonus episodes right now. So I thought, why not get it out since the people seem to want to listen to it? We'll do it.
Absolutely. We're going to do bonus content, and God knows if there's another lockdown, we'll have plenty of time to do it. But right now, I think that we are very much on the road to WrestleMania, and I think that this makes sense, actually. I mean, Roadblock 2016, we were both there. It was a network special from the Ricoh Coliseum in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We were both there when it was called the Ricoh Coliseum. It's now called the Coca-Cola Coliseum. And in the main event, Sorry, go ahead.
If you look hard enough, there we are on camera holding up a sign for a split second as well.
Yeah, it was Tyrone's 205 live sign. It was a really, really good event. We had the main event of the evening being Triple H versus Dean Ambrose, now known as Jon Moxley in AEW. And I have to say, right off the top of my head, really going to have a really hard time rebooking that main event. That was an outstanding main event. If you remember, we were there. Both of us at the time, it was one of those moments where time stands still. And is Ambrose going to win the title here?
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we done shitting on 205 Live and I can talk again? Is that what's happening?
Yes, we are done.
It was a great main event, but I'm not gonna lie. I do think that the people that we popped for the most are the people that most people didn't, and that's like JBL, Mark Henry, and Goldust.
That's because they're all dark matches. They weren't even on the show.
Well, JBL was the commentator, and we watched him two-step and trip on the way down the aisle, so that
Yes.
popped us.
Yeah.
But
Didn't pop
anyway,
Ronaldo, though.
Anyway, that is for next week. And you know where to find us, kids. And if you don't, I'm going to remind you. It is on Twitter at good_enemies, on Instagram at good_enemies, and on Facebook at Good Friends Better Enemies Podcast. And of course, you're listening to us on the Counted Out 7 YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, pardon my French, what the fuck are you waiting for? You not only get this show every week, you get all the interviews that they do, you get all the watch-alongs that they do, all the bonus episodes that all four of us do. It is well worth the subscription. So come on, kids, get on it. Let's do this. Let's keep this ball going. Right, Jay?
Absolutely, 110%. And I just pulled a fresh Bud Light out of the fridge just for this reason. For myself, for Tyrone, and for WCW, you've been listening to the Good Friends, Better Enemies podcast. Bye.